ever feel like just giving up? Even when, deep down you could change things.
Yeah, like that feeling of being totally powerless.
That's the heart of what we call learned helplessness. And today we're going to take a deep dive into it.
We're talking about a study that kind of turns psychology upside down.
Back in 1967, Martin Seligman and Stephen Mayer.
And yeah, it did involve dogs.
And electric shocks. I know.
Well, trust me, it's important. It revealed something huge about how we learn and cope.
Or sometimes don't.
Seligman, before this big study, had been doing other work with dogs, and he noticed something weird.
Weird how?
Well, dogs that were given shocks but couldn't escape them. Later on, even when they could escape new shocks.
They didn't.
It was like they'd given up before even trying.
That's so strange. Dogs are usually pretty good at figuring things out.
Right. So this 67 study was designed to get to the bottom of it. They had 3 groups of dogs. One that could escape the shocks, one that couldn't, and then a control group that didn't get any shocks at all.
So like a baseline to compare to.
Exactly. Both the escape group and the no escape group were put in harnesses.
Okay, so they couldn't just run away.
Right. But here's the key difference. The escape group, they had a panel they could press with their nose to make the shock stop.
So they had control.
But the no escape group, they got the same shocks.
Same intensity, same duration.
Everything. But they couldn't do anything to stop them.
No way to escape that bad situation.
Exactly. And this is where things get really interesting. They had this thing called a shuttle box. Basically a box with 2 compartments and a barrier in the middle.
Like a little wall they had to jump over.
Yeah, exactly. A light would come on to warn them a shock was coming. And to avoid it, the dog just had to jump over to the other side.
Seems simple enough.
Well, for the escape group and the control group.
Yeah.
Yeah, they figured it out pretty quickly.
But the no escape group.
This is where it gets heartbreaking. They often just didn't even try.
Like they'd already given up.
It was like that experience of having no control. It had literally changed their brains. They'd learned to be helpless.
Even though in the shuttle box, escape was possible.
It's like they just couldn't see it.
So how long did it take them compared to the other groups?
The no-escape dogs took way longer to figure out how to escape. And many of them, they just never did.
Oh, man. That's so sad. But they did another experiment, right, where they switched some dogs around.
Yeah. Some dogs went from being able to escape to suddenly not being able to.
And what happened?
Those dogs. Even though they couldn't control the shocks anymore, they kept trying. They didn't give up nearly as easily as the dogs who'd never experienced control.
So it's like having that initial experience of being able to escape, it gave them some hope.
Right. Like a belief that their actions could actually make a difference, even when things got tough.
That's a powerful insight.
It means learned helplessness isn't necessarily permanent. It can be unlearned.
So this isn't just about dogs then, right? Seligman was saying this applies to humans too.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
He argued that this same kind of process, this learned helplessness, is a major part of what happens in depression.
More than just feeling sad.
Right. It's not just sadness. It's this deep belief that you're powerless, that nothing you do will change anything.
Yeah.
And that can show up in all sorts of ways.
Like what?
Think about it. Feeling passive, giving up easily, lack of motivation, having trouble learning new things, even physical things like changes in appetite or sleep.
Yeah, those are all classic signs of depression.
And they line up perfectly with what they saw in those helpless dogs.
And it's not hard to see how this could play out in real life. I mean, think about losing your job, getting a serious illness, being in a bad relationship. Those are situations where anyone might feel trapped.
Yeah, like nothing you do matters.
And that perceived lack of control, that's where learned helplessness takes root.
Exactly. But Seligman and Mayer, they didn't stop there. They started seeing learned helplessness everywhere.
Really? Everywhere? Give me an example.
They looked at nursing homes. And they found that residents who had less control over their daily lives.
Like what they ate or what activities they did.
Yeah, simple things like that. They actually tended to be in worse health.
So even losing control over small things.
It can lead to a feeling of hopelessness. And that can actually impact both your physical and mental health.
Wow. Our minds and bodies really are connected.
They are. And it's not just about the elderly. Think about major life events. Losing a loved one, getting laid off, going through a divorce.
Yeah, those are huge.
And studies have linked those kinds of experiences to an increased risk of things like cancer. There was this study by Horn and Picard back in '79.
What did they find?
People who had experienced major losses in the years before a cancer diagnosis, they were actually at higher risk.
So it's like that feeling of helplessness.
It weakens your body's defenses.
Makes you more vulnerable.
Exactly. So this isn't just some theory. It has real consequences for our health.
Makes you think differently about how we approach healthcare, too, right?
Yeah. Have you heard of the good patient phenomenon?
I don't think so.
Well, this psychologist, Shelley Taylor, she pointed out that when you're in the hospital,
You're expected to just follow orders.
right, you're supposed to be cooperative, compliant, trust the doctors completely.
Which, makes sense.
Of course, you want to get better.
But what's the problem?
Taylor argued that this emphasis on being passive, while well-intentioned,
It can backfire.
it can actually make patients feel more helpless.
Like they're losing control over their own recovery.
Exactly. And get this, they even found this effect in babies.
Babies.
There was this study, Finkelstein and Rainey in '77. They had these babies with mobiles above their cribs.
Okay, I can picture it.
Some babies could control the mobile with their movements, while others couldn't.
So some had control, some didn't.
Right. The babies who had control, they figured out how to make the mobile move pretty quickly. But the ones who didn't have control,
What happened to them?
even when they were later given the ability to make the mobile move, they didn't even try.
No way. Just gave up.
They learned that their actions didn't matter, and that stuck with them, even when the situation changed.
That's incredible. And a little scary. I mean, imagine how early this sense of helplessness can take hold.
It's a powerful force, and it extends beyond individual experiences, too. Think about things like terrorism.
Okay, wow. Now we're getting serious.
The whole point of terrorism is to make people feel afraid and helpless.
Yeah, to create chaos.
Exactly. To make things feel unpredictable and uncontrollable. We saw this after 9/11 in a big way.
You're talking about the psychological impact.
The CDC reported increases in all sorts of things. Anxiety, anger, this constant feeling of being out of control.
Yeah, like the world had become a much scarier place.
And this psychologist, Harriet Breaker, she even called it September 11 syndrome. It captures that mix of anxiety and helplessness that so many people felt.
Like they were just waiting for the next bad thing to happen.
But here's the thing. Even in the face of something as horrific as terrorism,
You're going to tell me there's a silver lining.
not exactly a silver lining, because trauma is terrible. But research suggests that some people, after going through trauma, they actually experience what's called post-traumatic growth.
Wait, hold on. Growth. After trauma.
It sounds strange, but it's true. For some people, having their whole worldview shattered, it can actually lead to profound personal growth.
So they come out stronger. More resilient.
In a way, yes. There was this study in 2006 by Swickert and others that found that people who witnessed 9/11 indirectly.
No, they weren't directly involved, but they were still affected by it.
Exactly. They reported all sorts of positive changes in their lives.
Like what? Give me some examples.
Things like more gratitude, hope, kindness. They also described feeling a greater sense of leadership, love, spirituality, even teamwork.
Wow. So even in the face of tragedy?
They found strength and meaning.
That's pretty amazing.
It really shows the incredible resilience of the human spirit.
So while not everyone experiences post-traumatic growth, it does offer some hope.
Absolutely. It shows that even in the darkest times, there's a possibility for healing and growth.
But that brings up a really important question. What determines whether someone falls into learned helplessness or finds a way to rise above it?
Right, like what separates those who crumble under pressure from those who thrive in the face of adversity? Well, Seligman and his colleagues, they found some key factors. They found that people are more likely to develop learned helplessness if they tend to explain their lack of control in specific ways.
How do you mean explain?
They might see their situation as permanent, like this is never going to change, or they might blame themselves, thinking it's all their fault.
So it's about how you interpret the situation.
Exactly. And they might see their lack of control as affecting every part of their lives, not just one specific area.
So like, I lost my job, so I must be a failure at everything.
Right. And that kind of thinking, it's a recipe for learned helplessness.
Because you're basically giving up before you even start.
Exactly. But the good news is, if we can recognize those thought patterns,
We can start to change them.
we can learn to think about things differently.
Yeah.
And that's what we'll talk about more in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. From those dog studies to the impact of learned helplessness on humans, terrorism, even post-traumatic growth. It's a lot to process.
It is. But it's all connected.
So what's the main takeaway for our listeners?
The takeaway is this: our belief in our ability to control events. even small ones.
It has a huge impact on how we deal with challenges.
And even if you've been through tough times, times where you felt totally powerless,
Like those dogs who learned that control was possible.
you can learn that too.
Powerful stuff. Well, folks, that's it for part 1 of our deep dive into learned helplessness. Be sure to join us for part 2, where we'll explore even more about how to overcome this sneaky psychological trap and reclaim your sense of power.
See you there.
We've been talking about this idea of learned helplessness and, how it can really affect us. But now I kind of want to shift gears a bit. What can we do about it?
That's the good news. Learn helplessness. It isn't a life sentence.
Okay, so it's not like we're doomed if we've experienced it.
Nope. It's learned, so we can unlearn it, or at least learn to manage it.
So where do we even begin?
One of the most powerful things. It's called self-efficacy. It's basically believing in your ability to succeed.
So like just having a positive attitude.
It's more than just that. It's about really believing you can take action and that your actions will make a difference. That I can do this feeling.
I can see how that would be helpful.
When you have high self-efficacy, you're more likely to keep going, even when things get tough.
Makes sense. You're not giving up so easily.
You set bigger goals, you're more resilient.
So is this something we're born with, or can we actually develop it?
Luckily, it's not set in stone. We can build it up. And one of the best ways to do that is by focusing on our past successes.
You mean like patting ourselves on the back for things we've already done?
It's more than just that. It's about really taking the time to think about those wins. Big or small, doesn't matter.
Okay, give me an example.
Remember that time you finally finished that huge project at work? The one that felt impossible?
Yeah, that was a good feeling.
Or when you learned that new skill, the one you thought you'd never master?
Those are good examples. Makes you realize you're capable of more than you think.
Exactly. And each one of those moments, those are the building blocks of self-efficacy.
I like that analogy.
They remind you that you are capable, that you can do hard things.
So focusing on past wins, that's a great place to start. What else can we do?
Surrounding yourself with supportive people is huge, like your own personal cheerleading squad.
Okay, I'm all for that. But how does that actually help?
It's about having people who genuinely believe in you, who encourage you to push yourself.
People who are there to catch you when you fall.
Exactly. They give you that confidence to take risks, to try new things.
Knowing that someone's got your back.
Exactly. And those people can be anyone. Family, friends, mentors, even online communities.
It's about finding your tribe.
Exactly. The ones who lift you up.
So we've got focusing on past wins, finding our cheerleaders, anything else.
Breaking down big goals into smaller steps can be really helpful.
Instead of trying to do everything at once.
Yeah. It's much less overwhelming that way.
I can see that.
And as you check off those smaller steps...
You get that sense of progress.
Exactly. It builds momentum.
Yeah.
And speaking of momentum, finding ways to stay interested and engaged in what you're doing is crucial.
Passion? Right.
Exactly. When you enjoy something, you're more likely to keep going, even when it's challenging.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about prevention. But what if you're already feeling that pull of learned helplessness?
That's a great question. Overcoming learned helplessness, it does take effort.
It's not just going to magically disappear.
Unfortunately not, but it is possible.
So give us some tips. What can we do?
The first step is noticing those negative thought patterns.
Catching ourselves in the act.
Exactly. Those thoughts like, I can't do this, or nothing ever works out for me.
Yeah, we all have those sometimes.
They're like weeds in a garden. If you let them grow unchecked, they take over everything.
So we need to pull out those weeds.
Exactly. One way to do that is to challenge those thoughts with evidence.
Give me an example.
Let's say you think, I'm a total failure. Ask yourself, what evidence do I have for that?
And chances are you've accomplished a lot.
Right. It's just that our brains sometimes focus on the negative.
We're going to train ourselves to be more balanced.
Exactly. And another thing you can do is reframe your thinking.
Okay, what does that mean?
Let's say you didn't get a job you really wanted.
Ouch. Yeah.
Instead of thinking, I'm never going to find a job, try reframing it as a learning experience.
Turning a negative into a positive.
Right. What can I learn from this? What can I do better next time?
It takes the sting out of it a little bit.
And don't forget about control. Even when things feel totally out of your hands, there are usually small things you can control.
Like what?
It could be choosing to focus on what you can influence rather than what you can't. Or making time for activities that bring you joy.
So it's about taking back some of that control, even in small ways.
Exactly. And those small things can make a big difference.
And what about self-care? Does that play a role?
Self-care is huge. When you're feeling stressed or overwhelmed, taking time for yourself can be incredibly empowering.
So like taking a walk, listening to music.
Anything that helps you recharge.
It's about reminding yourself that you're worth taking care of.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And sometimes what you really need is to reach out to someone for support. Talk to a friend, a therapist, a mentor.
Just someone who can listen.
Someone who can offer a different perspective.
I think it's important to remember that this whole process of overcoming learned helplessness, it's not a one-time thing, right?
Right. It's a journey. It takes time and practice.
There will be good days and bad days.
Exactly. But the important thing is to keep practicing those self-efficacy skills. Keep taking action, even when it's hard.
Because each time you do,
You're getting stronger.
you're proving to yourself that you do have power.
And that's a really beautiful thing.
Well said. So folks, as you go through all the ups and downs of life,
Remember what we've talked about today.
believe in yourself, surround yourself with supportive people, and never underestimate the power of even the smallest action.
Because you are truly capable of amazing things.
Okay, so we've talked about learned helplessness, how sneaky it can be, and some ways to start fighting back.
It's all about taking back that feeling of control.
Right, that sense that you can actually make things happen. We talked about self-efficacy and finding your support system.
Those are big ones.
But let's get even more practical. What can people do, like right now, today, to feel more in control, even when things feel tough?
One thing I see a lot is people getting stuck on the things they can't control.
Oh, yeah, like obsessing over all the what-ifs.
Exactly. It can be totally paralyzing.
Yeah.
So one of the most powerful things you can do is shift your focus to what you can control,
So not ignoring the problems, but
but putting your energy where it can actually make a difference.
I like that. So instead of freaking out about things you can't change,
You focus on what you can change.
like, okay, I can't control the weather, but I can control how prepared I am for
Exactly.
it.
And sometimes what you can control is your attitude, instead of dwelling on the negatives.
Look for the positives.
Yes. Even in difficult situations, there are usually some good things to focus on. Things you're grateful for, lessons you can learn.
It's like choosing to see the opportunity, even when it's wrapped up in a challenge.
And you know what else is huge? Taking action. Even small actions.
To break out of that feeling of being stuck,
Exactly. It doesn't have to be something massive, just something that reminds you you're not just sitting there passively.
like those little wins we talked about.
Yes, those are so important. Think of it like this. You want to go on a big trip, right? But it feels overwhelming. So you start by,
Booking the flight,
exactly, one step at a time.
suddenly it feels more doable.
And as you check things off your list,
You build momentum.
speaking of momentum, don't underestimate self-care.
Ah, yes. Taking care of yourself.
When you're stressed, taking time for things that nourish you,
Like a walk in nature, reading a good book.
those things can be incredibly powerful.
As they remind you.
That you matter, that you deserve to feel good, that you have the power to choose how you respond to things.
And sometimes what you need most is to talk to someone.
Right. A friend, family member, therapist.
Someone you trust.
Someone who can just listen and offer support. Sometimes that's all it takes.
To feel less alone, less overwhelmed.
Exactly. And, this whole process of overcoming learned helplessness, it's not a quick fix. It's a journey.
There will be good days and bad days.
Of course. But the key is to keep practicing those self-efficacy skills we talked about.
Keep choosing to focus on what we can control.
And keep taking action, even when it's hard. Remember those dogs from Seligman's study?
The ones who eventually learned they could escape.
Yeah. They showed us something really important. Even when we've experienced helplessness, we can still learn that control is possible.
We can change our story.
Exactly. So as you move forward,
Remember all the amazing power you have within you.
you are strong, you are capable.
You get to decide how you respond to the world, and that's a beautiful thing.
It really is. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into learned helplessness. We hope it's given you some food for thought and some tools to start building a more empowered life.
And remember, you've got this.